Welcome to No Rain Date, a community podcast about local news and people. No Rain Date is a production of Saucon Source, LLC. For more local news and information, please visit sauconsource.com. Hello, and welcome to episode 51 of No Rain Date, your local news and interview podcast. I'm Josh Popachak, your host for No Rain Date and the publisher of Saucon Source, here with the headlines for the week ending April 22nd, 2021. As we are at the end of April, the primary election in Pennsylvania is now less than a month away, which means we're dialing up our pre-coverage of the election. We want our readers to be as informed as possible before every election, and particularly local elections, because local news is our bread and butter. So we have been publishing guides and lists of candidates to help introduce our readers to the crowded fields in some cases. So far, we've published lists of the candidates for both the Southern Lehigh School Board and Saucon Valley School Board. The Saucon Valley School Board story was just published on Wednesday rather. Both of these stories are sort of previews. We plan to have more in-depth coverage before the primary with actual statements from the candidates who choose to participate. In our guide, we've reached out to all of the school board candidates in Southern Lehigh and Saucon Valley who are reachable, and hopefully all of them will reply and take advantage of this opportunity to make potential voters more aware of why they're running, what their positions are, what they hope to accomplish if they're elected to the school board. Just because it's a school board election doesn't mean it's not important. I think we all know that school boards are the taxing authority, the primary taxing authority for most property owners in the state of Pennsylvania. So for that reason alone, these elections have serious consequences. Beyond that, they're related to the education of our young people. And certainly, I think that the events of the past year have shined a spotlight on education among other areas in which the U.S. may be falling behind. That's certainly not a reflection on the local school districts in question per se. However, I don't think there's a school district in the country that couldn't improve on some aspect of their facilities, methodology, curricula, etc. So these elections are important for many reasons, and we hope that you will be tuned in and, of course, registered to vote. The last day to register to vote in the May 18th primary election is coming up soon. It's May 3rd, and it's easy to do that. You can register online. Go to pavotes.com. And also, the League of Women Voters has a lot of helpful information about Pennsylvania elections. Also, the county websites have quite a bit of information for county residents. Northampton County has sample ballots for local residents to review. So you don't have to go into the poll on May 18th and feel confused or uncertain about what you're looking at. There's plenty of tools out there to educate yourself beforehand, and we're a bridge to that information. So we take that role very seriously, and we hope that our readers do as well. We have recently debuted a new regular piece of content on Saucon Source, a column we're calling Olden Days. And in this series, we are featuring newspaper articles from 100 years ago or longer. These are available through the wonderful website called newspapers.com. For a relatively modest subscription fee, you can literally search millions of old newspapers going back into the 1800s in many cases. It's amazing the news that you will find. I'm having a good time just looking at old Hellertown and Lower Saucon news, and that's obviously the focus to start with for this column. I do hope to incorporate Coopersburg headlines from days of old, Fountain Hill. All of these communities were well established by 1900 and well before that, but the period we're looking at primarily for mining these old stories is from about 1900 through 1922. One of the first ones I published the other day is pretty neat. It's a sort of a snapshot of what Hellertown was like in 1922. It was published by the Morning Call, and it's a half page, so it's a lengthy profile of the community. It includes both information that was current at that time and also a history of the Hellertown area from when it was founded in about 1742 up until 1922. There was already quite a bit of history, obviously, at that point, but we've added 100 years to it since then. And interestingly, in 2022, Hellertown will celebrate or mark the 150th anniversary of its incorporation, which was in 1872. I'm hitting you with a lot of twos here. But yes, 1872 was an important date in Hellertown history when it was incorporated as a borough. 1742 was the actual founding of the settlement of Hellertown. Those of you who were around in 1972 may remember the Hellertown Centennial, which was an extravaganza that lasted much of the year and featured parades and all kinds of hijinks in which the residents dressed up like the residents of Hellertown in 1872. I have written about that in the past. There are a lot of resources for remembering the Centennial, and you'll still find memorabilia floating around at yard sales and so forth. And speaking of yard sales, we are having a community yard sale in Hellertown and Lower Saucon again this summer. The date has been set for Saturday, June 5th, and we will be bringing you more information about that in the coming weeks. However, Hellertown residents, if you want to participate in the yard sale, normally you need a yard sale permit, which is available from the borough for $5. However, as has traditionally been the case, Borough Council recently voted to waive the permit fee for participants in the community yard sale, so that will be waived on June 5th only. And in years past, there have been well over 100 participating households. Just to be clear, the Hellertown Community Yard Sale is not a yard sale where everybody gathers in a central location like a park. I know that's what some people think of as a community yard sale. In Hellertown, it's simply a lot of people deciding to have a yard sale on the same day. And since Hellertown is very compact, it's easy to hit a lot of yard sales that morning into the early afternoon. It's normally held from about 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And like I said, we'll be bringing you the details of that in the near future. Getting back to local history, Lower Saucon Township Historical Society is encouraging the promotion of historic preservation with a photo contest that they recently launched. This will be for prizes. The first place winner will actually receive a $350 cash prize, so that's pretty generous. There are requirements for the contest. The most important one is where you take the picture. Since this is a local historical society, they obviously want local photos of historic locations. And so they do need to be taken in Hellertown Borough or Lower Saucon Township. For the other rules and how to submit your photo, please refer to our article, which is featured on the Saucon Source homepage. In local arts news, our friend Larry Deibert has another book out. Larry is a prolific author of mainly paranormal novellas and short stories, novels. but he has also tackled other subjects, including nonfiction. Larry's latest book is actually a revamping of his first book called Requiem for a Vampire, and I can actually remember writing about Requiem for a Vampire way back in 2007 when he published the first Requiem, and he actually wrote most of it in 1999. So this book is actually over 20 years old. And we sat down with Larry recently to talk about it and why he wanted to update it. There were just certain things about his choices as a writer that he came to regret. So after so many years of thinking about that and ruminating on it, he just decided to rewrite it and update the things that he wasn't crazy about, including his main character's name. He also added some different locations and updated the ending. So that's pretty exciting for fans of Larry's. He's also hosting a book signing for the Requiem for a Vampire 2021 this Saturday, April 24th at the Moravian Bookshop in downtown Bethlehem. That's from 1 to 3 p.m. And of course, Larry will be happy to see you. If you're a fan of his writing or just paranormal in general, you might want to stop by. Of course, please be safe. Social distancing and masking are still in place, so please shop for your latest book responsibly. In business news, we sat down with a local realtor, Allison Corradini, to talk about the state of the real estate market, not just in Saucon Valley, but in Pennsylvania and all around the country. We have a story about Allison, who's a realtor with Keller Williams in Allentown and is also part of a company called Rosette Homes, which is a unique sort of business in which she is a partner with her partner, Fritz Rosette, who's a general contractor. They are helping clients together in amazing ways. And one of those ways, of course, is if Allison has a potential home buyer, she's able to bring Fritz along on a showing, and he can sort of scan the home and notice things that you or I may not notice because we don't have 30 some years of a contractor's experience. Obviously, that can be tremendously beneficial for buyers, particularly right now because, as Allison explained, normally you can get a home inspection and use that in negotiations. Currently, because the market is so skewed towards the seller's market, home inspections, if they are being done at all, are for informational purposes only. So that makes the pre-sale review that Fritz is available for even more important. Allison took the time to explain a lot of other things about the current state of the market and where we may be headed in the future. Obviously, interest rates could be creeping up this year. Right now, they're very low still, and that's a factor in this boom where there's record low inventory and just not enough houses to bid on. She explained that for a house that's, turnkey and move-in condition, you can expect there to be easily 20 offers on it. So that's pretty remarkable, and that's a lot different from when I was looking for a house 10 years ago. I'm certainly glad it wasn't that competitive then. That adds a lot to the stress levels for the home buyers, and of course realtors are party to that. So you want somebody with a lot of skill, certainly, and Allison has experience and her clients are singing her praises. So check out our story about her, and we hope you'll enjoy that. Lastly, this week we are thinking about the environment with Earth Day. And once again, I want to give a shout out to the Lower Saucon Township Historical Society. They are the adopters of Countryside Lane. And last weekend, the volunteers, the members of the LSTHS, were out there picking up litter may sound like a small thing, but really that's what keeps our community looking great. The hard work of volunteers like the members of the Historical Society. And that is part of the township's Adopt a Road program, where organizations or businesses or even families can adopt roads. There are 40 roads throughout the township actually that have been adopted over the years, and typically they are cleaned twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. They have to be cleaned at least twice a year as part of the commitment that the adopter makes. The supplies for this cleanups are provided courtesy of the Bethlehem landfill, which is located in Lower Saucon Township. When the litter is picked up in bags, the bags are tied, left along the side of the road, and then the Township Public Works Department comes and collects the filled bags and disposes of them. It's great that we have so many people that care to do that in our community. It would be even better if we didn't have litter in the first place. That's one of my pet peeves, but I guess we're always going to have litter, so the silver lining is that we have people who do care. Certainly, if the township ever sees fit to add additional roads to their list, Saucon Source would be interested in adopting one, and I'm sure many others would be too. I'm not sure if that's something that's in the cards, but I did notice that as of 2021, all of the available roads have been adopted, and they don't normally become available again once they've been adopted. They're not like houses, so it would be neat if some of the other local roads maybe could be added to that list. I'm sure there's room for more. But that's our news roundup for this week, April 22nd, 2021. Thank you for joining us, and we'll have more headlines for you next week. Here at Saucon Source, our mission is to provide information and make it as available as possible to the people in our community. A large part of that is a public service, and we're grateful for the support we have from local advertisers, because that revenue helps keep the information flowing to you, our readers and listeners. Local news production does cost money, and that's why we've also introduced a voluntary membership option on Saucon Source, and we'd like to tell you a little more about that. Essentially, the membership is a recurring monthly contribution that shows your support for the work that we're doing. It helps guarantee that the information will remain free and accessible to you as well as to others in our community, and it also helps fund our future growth. Saucon Source is growing, and we're expanding our coverage area. The more support we receive from the community, the better coverage we can provide, and the more useful the site will be to you. So that's why we would invite you to visit our membership page on the website, sauconsource.com. You can do that by clicking on Join under My Saucon Source, which you'll see on the right side of your screen if you're on a desktop, or at the bottom of any article page. You'll see several membership options, including a monthly membership for $7, a 4-month membership for $25, or a yearly membership for $70. These are strictly voluntary contribution levels, and they're not any part of a paywall. There's no requirement to contribute, but we are grateful for those who have already done so, and we hope that you will consider purchasing a membership in the future. Doing so is quick and easy. You can do it securely online, and you can cancel at any time. Thank you again to all our current members, and thank you for considering becoming a future member. It's my pleasure this week on No Rain Date to welcome our interview guest, Christopher Kocher, president of the Wildlands Conservancy, which is based in Emmaus. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks so much, Josh. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of the Wildlands Conservancy, which has been an organization that's been protecting land and waterways in the Lehigh Valley for nearly 50 years. I didn't realize it had been around that long until I looked it up and did some research on the website. But Chris, if you could start off by telling us a little bit about the history of the organization, how it's evolved, and of course your involvement, which I know doesn't go back that far, but it goes back quite a ways.
Yeah, Wildlands Conservancy was started as a nonprofit organization back in 1973. There were 16 visionary citizens, we like to say, that all put $20 in a pot, to incorporate Wildlands Conservancy. They knew then what we know now, how important open space is and a clean environment. So they started the Conservancy back in 1973, really with the mission to protect and restore critical natural areas and waterways and educate the community to create a legacy of a healthy, sustainable environment for future generations. The organization started out in Bethlehem, and then in 1975, Wildlands Conservancy received a very generous gift from Leonard Parker Poole, the founder of Air Products, which was the Poole Wildlife Sanctuary that was entrusted to Wildlands Conservancy. And in 1975, after that gift, the organization set its offices up and its education programming on the beautiful, at the time, 72-acre Poole Wildlife Sanctuary. And the offices of Wildlands Conservancy have been there ever since. From those humble beginnings, the organization has protected over 56,000 acres of open space, which is a really impressive amount of acres when you think about, 56,000 acres. And we've done that through a variety of partnerships. We work very closely with state agencies like the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Bureau of Forestry, Bureau of State Parks. Out of that 56,000 acres of open space, Wildlands has transferred about 35,000 acres to state agencies to create state parks and state forests and state game lands. In addition, the organization has about 2,900 acres that it owns and manages in 14 nature preserves. In addition to that, the organization has about 8,000 acres where we own the development rights of about 77 parcels, and those are called conservation easements. So, the organization started out primarily as a land trust, not only protecting land, but also connecting people to it. The environmental education component of the organization has been a really important part of the mission, really since the inception of Wildlands back in 1973. We do about 1,000 education programs a year, and the whole goal behind that is to connect people to nature. We feel very passionately that if people get out and experience nature firsthand, they'll have a positive experience, and they'll hopefully develop a sense of stewardship for those natural resources and want to preserve, protect, restore, and enhance those natural environments. In addition to that, we do a lot of ecological restoration work, a lot of trail development work, and we do additional things to help enhance and protect really what makes this region so special, which is its natural resources. The organization primarily focuses on the Lehigh River Watershed, which includes Lehigh and Northampton counties. It's about a 10-county area, which is about 1,350 square miles. So we have programming in that whole landscape, and we really focus our attention and our programmatic expertise in that 10-county Lehigh River Watershed area.
Yeah.
You had also mentioned, Josh, about my involvement with Wildlands, and I wasn't around in 1973. In fact, I actually was born in 1973, so it makes it very easy for me to remember how many years old Wildlands Conservancy is. But I've been very fortunate to be with the organization for 25 years. Growing up here in the Lehigh Valley, I always had a passion and a love for nature and the natural environment. And, growing up, I had the opportunity to experience nature firsthand with my father and my grandfather, hunting and fishing and hiking and those types of things. And really always wanted to have a career in which I could protect what was really so special for me, which was the natural environment here in the Lehigh Valley. So after graduating college at Susquehanna University, I applied for this organization I never heard of before called Wildlands Conservancy. They hired me to do their water quality testing and some stream restoration work. About 13 years ago, I became the president of the organization. So it's been a wonderful time for me to be able to, focus my career, my passion on protecting the wonderful natural resources we have here in the community. And we've just built a wonderful team and a wonderful board and great, community of support in order to fulfill our mission right here in the Lehigh Valley.
That's a great summation of your history and the Wildlands Conservancy's history. Just going back to the very beginning, what was the motivation, I guess, for those founders to start the land trust, which you said it was, and were they concerned about the rate of development in the area, which has obviously only sort of accelerated since then?
Yeah, that's a great question. That they were very concerned about development that was occurring on South Mountain, which is the green backdrop to the south here of the Lehigh Valley. And those original founders had reached out to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and asked what they could do, and they got a letter back from Maurice Goddard, And it said, basically, if you want to protect open space, start a land trust. And that's what they did. In my office at the beautiful Dorothy Ryder Pool Life Sanctuary, I actually have a sticker that's from like 1974, which says Save South Mountain. And that's really was the call to arms for the 16 individuals to come together to form Wildlands Conservancy. It was about protecting South Mountain. Now, obviously, our mission has expanded well beyond, South Mountain. We do have several nature preserves in the South Mountain corridor, but we have nature preserves extending up into the Poconos. Our Thomas Darling Nature Preserve, for example, is 1,400 acres up in the Poconos. We have nature preserves that range from 9 acres along the Lehigh River to 11-acre island in the Lehigh River to a 1,400-acre nature preserve up at Tom Darling. So, yeah, it was really a call to action because these citizens saw that the Lehigh Valley was changing, and they particularly wanted to protect South Mountain because it's just such an ecological gem, and it's such a significant, backdrop of the Lehigh Valley.
Well, I think we owe them a debt of gratitude for having that vision because, people take it for granted that, the mountain's there and it's this lush green backdrop, like you said, but it doesn't have to be that way. It could have been covered in lights and buildings, I guess, if people hadn't had the vision.
Yeah, we were very fortunate that those individuals came forward and started Wildlands, not only because of the protection of South Mountain, but also the protection of the Kittatinny Ridge or the Blue Mountain. As we look to the north in the Lehigh Valley, that's been a major effort of Wildlands Conservancy since its inception is to keep the Blue Mountain green. There's about 20,000 acres that have been protected on the Kittatinny Ridge or Blue Mountain in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and Wildlands Conservancy is responsible for about 13,000 acres, within that landscape. So, our major efforts from a land protection perspective is the Kittatinny Ridge, South Mountain, and the Lehigh River corridor, as well as the headwaters of the Lehigh River, because it's so important to protect the source of the Lehigh, because if we protect the land where the water comes from, it's going to improve the quality quite dramatically, because the whole organization's really focused its efforts wholly on the Lehigh River watershed. So yeah, it's been really great to see, kind of this patchwork of protected properties coming together. We've had a vision, for a long time of not only protecting those significant landscapes, but also, having greenways and trail corridors to connect those open spaces together. And, our vision for the Lehigh Valley is to be able to have an interconnected network of greenways and trails and protected open space that's obviously important for wildlife, but it's also important for people as well, where they recreate and get a little respite from the day-to-day activity. So, the Lehigh Valley is very fortunate to have an organization like Wildlands Conservancy focusing on its environmental health and protection of the critical natural resources that, again, make this region so special.
Right, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more about what you just alluded to, which is access to the lands that are preserved? Because I suppose you have to balance the need to provide public access to them with protecting the wildlife, the flora, the fauna that are found in them. So is that difficult sometimes? Is that challenging?
Well, it's a challenge for sure. Our land protection efforts are science-based, so we focus our land protection efforts on the piece of the property that have the highest ecological value or recreational value. And again, one of our major initiatives is to not only protect that land, but then connect people to that land to develop that sense of stewardship. So, we have to balance use with preservation. When we do protect a piece of property and make it one of our nature preserves, we always do an ecological inventory of that property and identify where the special habitats are or habitats of concern are located, and then we devise our access to protect those areas, ensuring that the value of that piece of property is met not only now but also for future generations as well. So it's a delicate balance because we want people out and experiencing nature. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're managing and having that property continue to provide, the significant ecological value, which made it so important for us, to protect. We always tell our visitors, we want to have visitors to our sanctuaries that are open to the public, but we ask them to, again, respect the private property, respect the signage, and stay on the trails where indicated. So that goes a long way to ensuring that we don't negatively impact these beautiful, natural areas that have been protected for now and for future generations.
You mentioned also conservation easements earlier. Can you maybe explain in layman's terms what a conservation easement is and why they're important? And those properties, are those open to the public, or are they, private but preserved?
That's a great question, Josh. I get that question asked quite often. As a land trust, we look at all the tools in our toolbox to protect property. In some cases, we purchase a piece of property and then transfer it to a state agency because it's adjacent to our existing state-owned property. In some cases, we retain that as one of our nature preserves and make it open to the public. But in some cases, people want to protect their property, but they still want to own it. And that's where the conservation easement comes in, where we typically get those either donated to the rights to us, or in some cases, we purchase those rights, or some of the municipalities help us purchase those rights. And therefore, the individual still owns the property, but they've given to us, or we've bought from them, the right to develop the property. So as a land trust, we ensure that that restriction will be met forever. So we monitor those properties, and we ensure that the conservation values that made that property so important are met in perpetuity. So, like no subdivision, no buildings. I mean, each easement's a little different, but generally speaking, once the property's under easement with us, there's typically no further, quote unquote, development or buildings that can go on that particular property. So it becomes a really great tool to protect open space, but at the same time, have that still under private ownership. Now, with those conservation easements, those are typically not open to the public because they are privately owned. Mm-hmm. And that's another reason why we balance our land preservation efforts. We have some properties we protect that are nature preserves that are open to the public. We have some that are easements that are not. And then we have some that are transferred to state agencies for state parks and state forests and those types of things. So out of the 56,000 that we've protected, about 8,000 of those are privately held in conservation easements.
Gotcha. That's interesting to note the difference there. And I would imagine that, in many cases, these agreements take years to finalize. Are you constantly sort of like identifying parcels and then beginning the process of preserving them? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. That's another great question. We have developed a land selection criteria. We utilize geographic information system mapping and have identified, for example, in the upper Lehigh River watershed, we've identified 80 parcels that are important to protect from an ecological perspective, from a recreational perspective, or from a connectivity perspective. And then we are, actively going out and trying to protect those pieces of property. We do the same thing here in the Lehigh Valley. We're very fortunate to have great partners at the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission and many of the local municipalities who are also interested in protecting, significant ecological properties and recreational properties. So, we utilize the Planning Commission's plans and comprehensive plan. Our work is entirely consistent with the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission's comprehensive plan. We also did a plan for the entire Lehigh River watershed called the Lehigh River Watershed Management Plan. We did that back in 2003 and then updated a couple of years ago. And that also lists a whole host of recommendations to improve and enhance the quality of the Lehigh River. And it also identifies, restoration projects and land protection projects that are important to complete. From a land protection perspective, some of these projects take years. The fastest we ever have purchased a piece of property was 31 days. It was a really critical piece up on the Kidstoney Ridge, and it was going for sheriff's sale. And we reached out to our partners at the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and were able to protect that piece of property in 31 days. But some of them take decades. I'll tell you a quick story. I'm sitting in the office at the sanctuary. We get a knock on the door, and again, it's an office. So when somebody knocks on the door, I know that they have never been there before, right? Because you just walk in and say your name and that type of thing. So a gentleman comes in, and he said he wants to talk to somebody in the land protection department, and some of our folks were busy, so I walked out and met him and brought him back in my office. And he asks me if the offer still stands on this individual's piece of property. And I'm thinking, gosh, I don't remember this name. So I called in one of our land protection specialists, and we still can't remember what this name is. So here it turns out that back in 1987, a gentleman by the name of Charlie Neff, who was a very instrumental person in our organization in protecting significant amounts of open space, sent this individual a letter asking if she would be interested in selling her 20 acres on the Blue Mountain. She's now 99 years old. Huh. She's of sound mind and body, and she wanted to know if her offer of $400 an acre still stood for that piece of property.
Wow.
And we were like, oh my gosh, this property is worth well more than 400.
Yeah.
She had the original letter, that we sent her back in 1987. I told her that it's worth more. She said, no, you were interested back in 87, and I want to get my affairs in order. I want to see it protected. And we pretty much bought it sight unseen, for $400 an acre, and then transferred it to the Pennsylvania Game Commission. So, and that happened, like 3 years ago. So, we plant these seeds really throughout the entire community. You never know when one of them is going to sprout, but
Right.
It was really neat to have that letter, that part of that history of Wildlands and work that Charlie Neff had done, 30 plus years before, come to fruition and see a piece of property protected.
And that's heartwarming too, because I could imagine that could easily be worth 10 times that, today.
Oh yeah. And that's the other thing, Josh, that I'm just so amazed at is just the generosity that people have when it comes to their land. Wildlands as a land trust provides an opportunity to create that legacy and protect those pieces of property in perpetuity. And we've had some very significant gifts, like the gift from Leonard Poole, which I mentioned. Bob Rodale helped us establish the South Mountain Preserve with the donation of the Walters tract back in 1975. He purchased 96 acres so it wouldn't be developed, and then donated that to Wildlands. And currently, our South Mountain Preserve is now over 400 acres. So those investments that the early Wildlands visionary leaders had put in place have really come to fruition, and we've been adding to those existing nature preserves, like South Mountain now, over 400 acres, and a great ecological and recreational destination.
I wanted to also touch on funding, because obviously these purchases require funds, and you are a nonprofit organization. You have support from individuals and local corporate sponsors. Why do businesses get behind the mission of the Wildlands Conservancy? I know maybe the popular perception is that, it would be big business is all for development, but they're supporting you in these efforts. Why does it benefit them to do that?
Yeah, that's another good question. And, that gone are the days of the economy and the environment being opposed. In order to have a good economy, we need a good environment. In order to have a good environment, we need a good economy. The message we have for our business community, again, and we're very fortunate with a very progressive business community here that understands this and gets it, is, they're in competition for knowledge workers, right? Mm-hmm. And they want to attract the brightest minds to their businesses to be successful. And guess what? Where do you want to live? You want to live in a place that has clean water and has clean air and has recreational assets and amenities and open space. And that's what Wildlands Conservancy provides. It provides this community with the protection of its critical natural resources, the ecological value, the environmental value, and the recreational value. And businesses understand that is that in order for them to be successful, we need the clean air and clean water, and we need livable communities. And really, Wildlands provides that work and has been providing that work for almost 50 years. Here in the Lehigh Valley, you think about would you want to live in a community that didn't have parks and didn't have trails and didn't have clean water and didn't have clean air? It'd be very difficult for a business to be successful in that type of environment. Mm-hmm. So we're very fortunate to get businesses that understand that and support Wildlands in that regard.
Right, live and work really, and I these companies I'm sure want to recruit people to this area too. So I would imagine that's a factor.
Yeah, it's a huge factor on not only getting them here, but also retaining them. And again, our vision for the Lehigh Valley is Lehigh Valley that contains clean water, protected natural areas, working farms, natural protected areas, all connected with a network of greenways and trails where nature and businesses and the community want to come, stay, and flourish. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, the Lehigh Valley is a wonderful place to live, work, and play. And the work of Wildlands Conservancy has been really instrumental in that for the past almost 50 years.
I want to also move next to talking a little bit about some of the programming you have. You mentioned that in a typical year you have something like 1,000 different programs. What are some of those programs? Have they been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic? If so, are they coming back now, or are they coming back in a different form? I guess being an outdoors oriented organization, you have been able to have some things that other groups haven't. But I'm sure it's had an impact, and you can talk a little bit about that.
We have about 1,000 education programs a year. We do a lot of school-based programming. So we're in the classrooms, and we have a lot of field trips that come to not only the Dorothy Roberta Pula Sanctuary, but our other nature preserves. The best source of information on our programs is our website at www.wildlandspa.org. We also have a huge amount, probably about 400 or so community-based programs. And those community-based programs include hikes, tours of our nature preserves, animal presentations, and those types of things. So not only are we able to serve the school districts with education programming that's tied to the Pennsylvania Academic Standards for Environment and Ecology, but we're also able to get the entire community out to our programs, out to see nature. And as I said earlier, it's really important for us, if we protect a piece of property and no one ever visits it, right? And no one ever knows it's there, and no one ever really understands nature or appreciates nature, how is that property going to be stewarded and protected and viable, long term? So our education programming is really important for us to, again, develop that sense of stewardship, for those natural resources. What better way to get somebody in love with nature, than to get them out? I was very fortunate, as I mentioned earlier on our call, I had somebody, my parents and my grandfather, really work to connect me to nature. But let's face it, not everyone in the community does. And Wildlands provides that mechanism, that opportunity, to get kids out and adults out as well. We're hoping to develop that really lifelong connection and appreciation of nature. And again, our education programs really are award-winning, and they range from, as I mentioned, hikes to tours of our nature preserves, to specific education programming around any number of environmental topics. We also have really great programs like the Bike and Boat program. That's a national award-winning program. We started that about 24, 23 years ago. And that's a program where we take school-age children, middle school children, and community members on a 4-mile canoe ride down the Lehigh River, and then we bike them back a 4-mile bike ride on the D&L Trail. So it's a really great way to experience really the lifeblood of our community, which is the Lehigh River. And for many, it's kind of their first experience, out on the river, and it's just a great program. We also have a program called Wild About Learning, where we take some of our animal ambassadors, our live animals, and we go into elementary schools, and we have a live animal presentation. We read a book about that animal, again, to just foster that sense of appreciation for nature and our natural resources. So the education program is really, really important to not only, again, get people connected to nature, but also, get them connected to Wildlands and the work that we're doing, in the community. The second part of your question was, the impacts of COVID. We stopped in-person education programming last March. We transitioned to really full virtual programming. Our staff did a wonderful job of being able to pivot. We were doing virtual in-school presentations. We transitioned all of our birthday parties and even some hikes into virtual hikes as well. Those were very popular. More recently, we started to do some in-person programming, again, following all the appropriate CDC guidelines. But we are, doing some hikes on our property, doing some of the community-based programming, and that's been very successful. Most of those are sold out because we have, reduced the number of participants that are allowed, again, to make sure we have the proper distancing and those types of things. So if you see a program on our website, sign up for it quickly, because many, if not all of them, end up, being sold out. Mm-hmm. The other thing that, with COVID specifically, and this is, maybe a little bit of a bright spot that may be coming out of COVID is, people didn't have much to do, right? They were quarantined, they were at home. And many people in the community turned to nature. We have had record numbers of people on our local trails, on the river, in our nature preserves. People were out experiencing nature because they weren't able to do much else, Right. So it was a really great opportunity for them to learn more, about wildlands, about our nature preserves. We were able to use a little bit of technology. We've developed now 5 apps for 5 of our most popular nature preserves. So you can, download that app on the App Store, and that gives you a map and information about that particular, all of Wildlands Conservancy's nature preserves, as well as information about our programming. So it's a great way to be able to, get outside and experience the wonderful natural resources that we have in the wonderful nature preserves that Wildlands owns and manages here in the Lehigh Valley and the Lehigh Watershed. So, my hope is that, coming out of COVID, the community will better understand how important of a role nature played, during COVID, and the fact that, we need nature nearby. We all need nature for any number of reasons. Again, Wildlands Conservancy is the organization, in the region that's helping provide those opportunities to the public.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, and that's something I also had wanted to touch on, because I remember like a year ago, and you're right. I mean, I think I had a story, like it was something, the headline was something like, it's okay to enjoy nature, because everybody was just afraid of their own shadow almost at that point, and you couldn't do much except go out into a field or on a trail, and it was this time of year too. So it was springtime and everything was beautiful. That's a memory of that time that I think I'll always have. But hopefully that appreciation that people had for nature will have a lasting impact. You think?
I think so, and I hope so as well. I mean, there was a lot of generosity that we received from the community, over the past year. I like to tell stories. So, we were working on one of our trails at our nature preserve. One of our staff members was there, and the individual came past, and they both had masks on and that type of thing. And the woman kind of moved out of the way, so she was 6 feet away. And as she was passing, she had said, "Do you need help with fixing that trail?" And the individual, our staff member, said, "Yeah, here," and went to hand the shovel to her to make light of the fact that she wanted help. And she kind of laughed. She said, "Well, that wasn't the help I was referring to." And they kind of chatted a little bit. And 2 days later, we got a check in the mail for $1,200.
Wow.
She was just so appreciative of the fact that she had a place to go in nature, and she wanted to help make sure that the trails were maintained. And again, I just think those are really really bright spots that came out of this. That people were very generous and understood the importance of nature. And there's many other stories, but that's one that really hit home for me. Is we're having a positive impact on people's lives, and a positive impact here on our natural environment. And it's just great when people recognize that and are supportive of our mission.
Absolutely. You also mentioned the bike and boat program. I wanted to give a shout out to that, because I participated in that, I think 7 or 8 years ago, and that was really awesome, because for one thing, I had never really had the chance to be close to the Lehigh River before. I don't think I'd ever, maybe as a little kid I touched it, but growing up in Bethlehem, it's difficult to access it because of the fact that the whole south side is train tracks, and then the north side, I guess Sand Island, you can get pretty close to it, but I'd certainly never been on it before, and that was a totally new experience, and it was a lot of fun. So I would highly recommend that whenever it comes back.
That's great. I'm glad you're a bike and boat alumni. That's wonderful. I've run into them all throughout the Lehigh Valley. The other program you might want to check out is our Lehigh River Sojourn. The Lehigh River Sojourn is now we're celebrating our 25th year. That's going to take place this June, from the June 26th to the 28th. And that's a 50-mile canoe ride on the Lehigh River. We take 3 days, and we paddle different sections of the river. We have staff naturalists talking about the natural resources, the education programs. We provide equipment, catered meals, the whole type of thing. So it's a really comfortable way for people to experience nature firsthand. And like I said, it's hard to believe that, but we're in the 25th year of doing that, and there's literally been thousands and thousands of people that have experienced the Lehigh River that way. Because you're right, Josh. The river is not as accessible as you may think. Wildlands Conservancy did do a Lehigh River water trail and identified 22 access points along the river where you can get in to fish and to kayak and canoe and those types of things. But historically, the Lehigh River was one of the only rivers, or the only river, to be privately owned in the United States. It was owned by the Lehigh Coal Navigation Company. They owned the power of the water. So for generations, the canal was on one side, the railroad was on the other, and it was owned by a private company. So no one was really there. It was a very industrial river. It was used to transport coal and other materials through the canal. So for really for generations, that river was not part of the community. It was an industrial river and served that purpose, but didn't serve a recreational purpose. So a lot of our efforts are designed around to, again, getting people out on this wonderful natural resource that's right in our backyards and is the lifeblood, of our community. And it's so ironic that, the history that so affected the quality of the river, because it's cleaner now than it's been the last 150 years. But that history that so affected it really helped preserve it today, because you have this wonderful corridor. When we take people on the Lehigh River from Allentown to Bethlehem, they don't see anything except trees and nature and bald eagles and ospreys and herons. And again, it's because the river was privately owned and there wasn't a lot of quote unquote development along the river other than, some of the industrial activity, which I talked about before. So I always find that really ironic that the history that so affected it is really why we have this wonderful greenway and natural resource today.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, and you can easily contrast it with like the Delaware River, which, parts of it have homes right up, along the river, and you don't see that on the Lehigh. Just trees, which is really cool, and the wildlife.
Yeah, and having been with Wildlands for the past 25 years and being on the river really my entire life. I took my first canoe trip on the Lehigh River probably when I was about 10 or so. It's just remarkable how this river has returned and recovered. When I was growing up, you didn't really catch many fish, and now there's trout and there's smallmouth bass and there's suckers, and there's just a real great population there. We see a lot of great biological indicators. I mentioned before, we're seeing bald eagles and osprey and cormorant and all different types of birds. Now along the river's corridor. Who would have thought that you would see a bald eagle on the Lehigh River, 25 years ago?
Right.
It just wouldn't have happened, And now, for pretty many of our trips, we were seeing, at least one bald eagle, down on the Lehigh, and several osprey and great blue heron. And again, those are just really great biological indicators that the river has returned, and it's much healthier. We still have a long way to go. We still have a lot of work to do. That's why the work of Wildlands Conservancy is so important. But it's really remarkable how that river has recovered.
Yeah, and I think it's remarkable how quickly people take bald eagles for granted, because it was just a few years ago that, it was something amazing to see one around here. And the last couple of times I shared a picture of one on social media, I think people were like, oh, bald eagles, I see them all the time around here. It's like, well, you're tired of them already? I'm not, like,
I would say those are good problems to have, right?
Exactly. Well, that's Facebook for you. Yeah. You also are involved in stream restoration efforts, like with removing dams. And could you maybe explain why that is an important thing to do for the health of the waterways?
Yep. Our ecological restoration work really focuses on the tributaries of the Lehigh River. We do a lot of work with a lot of state agencies and municipalities and private landowners to develop riparian buffers along the streams, which is basically planting streamside vegetation. That's really critically important to holding onto the stream bank, providing shade to the stream, and providing nutrients with the leaf litter and those types of things. It also does a great job of removing pollutants and sediment before it gets into the river. So riparian buffers is really a key component of what we do. We also do a lot of stream restoration work where we go in there and add in-stream habitat for fish or stabilize banks to make sure erosion doesn't take place. We also do work to remove unused or dilapidated dams. The dams are really problematic when it comes to water quality because they're not natural features. They prevent fish migration, and they also warm the water. Behind the dams, typically there's a lot of sediment that gets deposited, so it covers up the substrate. And the creek or the stream is ecologically not nearly as productive as it would be, during regular, moving and flowing water. And it also separates fish from spawning grounds as well. So it can significantly impact, the number of fish and the diversity of fish, in our ecosystems. Fortunately, the Delaware River is one of the longest undammed rivers in the country. The Lehigh River is a tributary of that. So there's American eels and striped bass and American shad that all come up, the Delaware and try to get up into these other tributaries. And our work is designed to make more of those tributaries, accessible for these species that spend some time in the ocean and come back up to spawn in the Lehigh Valley streams. And you think about it, all the nutrients flow downstream, right, with the water. So by bringing those species back into ecosystems, it is dramatic the way that those riverine systems recover, because you're bringing nutrients back up into the system in the way of fish and fish eggs and spawning and those types of things. So it's really, really important to have those natural cycles take place. And when we have, dams on those structures or on those creeks, it really prevents a lot of that natural process to continue. So our efforts really are designed around, dams that are not utilized, for recreation or water supply or other purposes, that really their purpose was, 100 years ago to run a mill, which is no longer, in operation. So when those types of dams are there, we try to work with the property owners and, develop strategies to remove those and get that function back into a natural system.
It's really interesting to me how within just a few generations, the value of the rivers and the streams has changed, from something that was just a natural resource sort of to be exploited, for industrial purposes to, how we see it now. Hopefully most of us do as this, something to be protected, but that really is evident from talking to you.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, the river, particularly Lehigh, has served our community really for countless generations now. It just served it in different capacities. I mean, from the first Lenni Lenape Indians to sell along its banks, to the industrialists that brought us iron, cement, and steel, to the resident wildlife, to today, where, again, we have this wonderful natural resource that's in our backyard that's thriving, with life and with people and recreational opportunities. It's just really great to see. The Lehigh River is kind of like the comeback story. It was always there, and we abused it for a long time, and now we're definitely taking better care of it, and it's serving our community now in a recreational capacity and a natural capacity, whereas historically it was much more of an industrial capacity.
Right, absolutely. I want to sort of close out by having you talk a little bit about how people can connect with you online. But before that, I wanted to ask about fundraisers and, events for fundraising. Is that something that you see coming back for the Wildlands Conservancy later this year?
Yeah, we're evaluating whether or not to bring back some of our traditional fundraising events, again, just because of the COVID impacts. But there is information on our website of how individuals can donate and support Wildlands Conservancy and our work at www.wildlandspa.org. There's information there to support the organization, support our river work, our land preservation work, recreational trail work. All those important initiatives are really made possible through the generosity of the Lehigh River watershed, community. And as you can imagine, it takes a lot of resources to protect nature. So we, are always trying to raise additional dollars. The more money we raise, the more good we can do, here in the Lehigh Valley to protect the Lehigh River and to protect the land that makes this region so special, and, connecting those kids and adults to nature. So I encourage everyone listening to go on our website, find out more about Wildlands, get out and experience nature firsthand, get to one of our nature preserves, and find ways in which you can support Wildlands. In addition to financially supporting Wildlands, we do offer, volunteer opportunities, at our nature preserves and some of our trail work and cleanup. So there's many ways that individuals of all ages can be part of Wildlands Conservancy and be part of protecting what makes this region so special.
Fantastic. Well, I would echo what you just said and encourage everybody to visit the website and, connect with you on social media as well. I know they'll find the links to do that on the website, along with a lot more information. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Josh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and get out and experience nature.
Definitely. You've inspired me.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Thanks. We've been recording No Rain Dates since late 2019, and we've produced a fair number of episodes at this point. We would love to hear your feedback about what we're doing. What makes you tune in every week? What ideas do you have for interview guests? Is there something that you think the podcast is missing? Feel free to share your thoughts, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, with us. You can do that by emailing Josh at sauconsource.com. No Rain Date is a local news and information podcast, and we focus on the Saucon Valley. However, our guests are from the Lehigh Valley and beyond. So please try and keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about ideas for future episodes. Thank you. No Rain Date is an original production of Saucon Source LLC. Our theme music is provided by This Way to the Egress. For more great music by them, be sure to follow This Way to the Egress on Spotify. Thank you for listening.
Every night, he climbs the tower, sees your face on every dollar.